Jim, Bob and Michelle Duggar finally confirmed last night that their son Josh molested 5 girls more than a decade ago, 4 of them his own sisters. Does this happen more often than we think among siblings? So joining me now to discuss that is Kate Shellnut, Associate Editor at Christianity Today, also psychologist and writer Nell Gibbon Daly, and Charles Blow, New York Times op-ed columnist and CNN political commentator, and Sunny Hostin is back with us. So Kate, Fox has released more of their interview with the Duggars. I want to play it for you and then we'll talk about it.
Okay.
I just remember I said to Josh, I said, when he came back, he was broken. He was so humble. He was so repentant. Over and over, he asked for forgiveness, to all that, that he had hurt. And I said to him, Josh, God's word is true. He said that if you cover your sin, you won't prosper. But whoso confesses and forsakes it shall have mercy. And I said, you've had mercy. God's forgiven you. These people have forgiven you. And I said, and now we were waiting to hear, were they going to come, serve a warrant, come take him away? We didn't know what they were going to do.
So some feel, Kate, that the Duggars were hiding behind their religion to justify their response. What do you think?
Well, I'm not surprised that the Duggars are emphasizing that Josh is forgiven. As people who believe in a God of grace, it makes sense that that's going to be part of their response. What's disappointing is that that's such an emphasis of their response, that we're hearing so much about how Josh is forgiven and reformed, and a lot less about kind of the other things that God might have us do in this situation. He's not just a God who forgives people for doing terrible things, but also one whose heart breaks for those things that happen and the people they happen to. So the fact that their kind of anthem has been, well, he's reformed, he's changed, he has this great character now, instead of saying, we have this platform now and we're going to talk about all the people who are affected, all the victims out there who God grieves for because they've been exposed to this kind of thing within their own families. I just see kind of a disconnect between a God of mercy and a God of justice for victims, and I think that kind of goes hand in hand for a Christian God.
Nell, is it helpful to the victims that this whole focus on forgiveness, is this helpful or hurtful to the victims? This is for Nell.
Yeah, okay. I mean, you're asking the question, is forgiveness helpful to these victims?
Because I keep saying that Josh is forgiven, but you don't hear much in there about, well, the victims. We hear about Josh. God has forgiven Josh.
Yeah, God has forgiven Josh. I mean, I think we're going to hear tomorrow night on the interview whether or not these girls have forgiven their brother. And the sense I get from the clips that they've shown is that the girls have. The thing is that in this family, this is the fabric of how they deal with things through their Christianity, right? And so it would make sense that they're finding peace within their spiritual faith.
That's exactly what they said tonight. Let's listen in a newly released part of that interview.
Your daughters wrote a book, and they talk in there about the importance of forgiveness, even if bitterness remains. Does any bitterness remain, or do you feel like you've gotten to the point of true forgiveness in your family?
Yeah, our family has definitely gotten to the point that there's no bitterness. That, as a matter of fact, forgiveness is not something you feel like doing, it's really a choice. And when people wrong us, we say, God, I choose to forgive this person. And sometimes people come back and ask for forgiveness, sometimes people don't. But it's important, just like Jesus was hanging on the cross, he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.
Okay, so he talked about that. He also talked about the over the clothes, under the clothes, all of that. Are they in denial in some sense?
About what happened?
Yeah, because they keep saying forgiveness and they talk about it, but it just, to me, it seems like a real disconnect that if something happened, and this is just me, and I'm a hypothetical, as a survivor, the first thing I would do is, oh my gosh, my girls, what happened to my girls? How are you, honey? Are you okay? And then I would deal with the part about the other kid that I'm dealing with, the one who is the actual perpetrator. My first focus would be to talk about the victims. That wasn't the first focus in this interview. They talked about Josh first, and mostly.
Well, I think that's the problem with what we're hearing through this interview, is that we actually don't know, it seems to me, that we actually don't know what transpired inside the family, because it was so hush-hush, and because it doesn't seem like the interview actually brought forth how they handled it exactly when it happened with the girls,
Yeah.
right?
I only
They
know
haven't
from the
given-
interview. And from the
yeah,
interview,
they
it seems like the
haven't
focus is on Josh and not the girls.
And if I can weigh in here also, what we're hearing a lot of is minimizing. We're hearing, well, this didn't really affect them because it happened while they're sleeping. I can't begin to tell you when I was prosecuting child sex crimes how many victims told me I pretended to be asleep while this was happening.
Sonny, Mel said the same thing.
No question about it. The other thing is, well, it only happened over their clothes. And then it happened underneath their clothes, but just for a quick second. That is classic grooming on behalf of the perpetrator, but also classic minimizing on behalf of the parents and the family members of the perpetrator.
And Charles, as Sonny said, you said that he has no legal exposure, right?
He doesn't
That
have any
Josh-
criminal
okay.
exposure,
so
so
then
why
he's
aren't
a
we hearing
grown
from him?
Why isn't he out there speaking?
I don't know exactly why he's not there speaking, but I do agree with Sonny, that they're minimizing to a certain degree. But I also agree with what you said earlier in the show, which is how many parents are actually going to turn their kids into the cops? And I think that's a very real thing. And
Not to condone what they're doing, but
it
it's
is
tough,
not
right?
in any way
Right. Absolutely.
a condoning of what they're doing. It is not in any way a minimizing of what has happened to the girls in that home. But I think that what we have to do as a society is to decide how much we want to focus on punishment and how much we want to focus on the victims and their treatment. And if we change that lens, I mean, that stretches across society. We are a punishment society. We want to punish people rather than to deal with treatment, if that's drugs, whatever the problem is. In these particular cases, if there is a person, there are two people in the home. One is the victim and one is the offender, right? And the parent now has the put in position of being the reporter. Are you going to report? I think we have to have a conversation about how can we make space and not be quite as punitive as we are now, particularly for children, because right now you can, if you're 14 or older, you can be added to the sexual offenders list
registry,
forever, for your entire life at 14 years old. And all I'm saying about that is, if I'm focusing just on the victims, I look at that and say, and what a lot of therapists say is, number one, it's not necessarily a deterrent for a 14-year-old because they're not even aware of the law, right? So it's not a deterrent. Number two, the parent may be less likely to seek help for the younger because because if you take it to a real therapist, they're mandatory reporters.
Okay.
So I'm just so you have safe haven laws, like if a woman has a baby, we want to protect that baby. We just say, bring it somewhere, we'll deal with it. I just think we need to figure out some way of carving out a space where we can deal with the victims rather than the punishment side. I just want to keep the focus on the girls.
Hold that thought, everyone. When we come back, we'll continue on. Don't go anywhere. Back now with more on the Duggar scandal and new statements tonight from Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar. Back with me now is Katie Shellnut, Nell Gibbon Daly, Charles Blow, and Sonny Hostin. And Nell, we spoke about the statute of limitations just the other day, right, on the show, and we spoke with you about that last night. I want you to listen to Jim Bob, what he said tonight about it.
They said, and we didn't realize, but because that report was made back 3 years before, they said the statute of limitations is run out because it was the police responsibility to take action on that on a confession. And because they didn't do that, they said, you know what, everything was taken care of, this is over. And it seems like you as parents have gotten counseling, you've done everything that needs to be done for your family.
Do authorities need to be under scrutiny here now?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I mean, why wasn't something done when it first came out, and then all of a sudden the statute of limitations are up and the Duggars are saying, oh,
I think you're right. Actually, I had it wrong then.
this.
I thought that perhaps they didn't report it until after the statute of limitations had run. If they truly reported it to an officer friend of theirs, and that officer just gave him a stern talking and did nothing, that officer bears a tremendous amount of responsibility and blame because you are a mandatory reporter, and that officer should have done more with this, and I think would have protected more children.
Before I get to Katie, I want to get back to Charles, because Charles, I think you make a very good point. And again, we have to preface it. I have to give a caveat by saying no one is condoning anything here.
No.
But when it's in the family, if you think that your kid is going to get locked up, or if your kid is going to be on the sex offender registry, or what have you, I think you're right. There needs to be some space for reporting.
But I think there is space. It doesn't happen like that.
I guess I'm saying this, is that, I'm a parent too. I wouldn't actually know. I mean, And
That's
I
what
think
we're
I'm
saying.
well.
We don't know.
I'm a smart
Even I'm
guy.
a mandated
I don't think that
reporter.
I would actually know what to do. I would start to investigate what do I do,
yeah.
right? And I think that one of the you may not agree with the minimizers is horrible and some of the language they use is horrible.
Yeah.
But this idea of them actually starting to figure out what to do, that's actually a thumbs up for that family. And also, one thing that I want to remember.
I wouldn't go that
Yeah.
far.
I'm sorry.
I wouldn't go that far
I'm sorry.
because they allowed other children to be abused.
Right. What I'm saying is this. That was a positive. My understanding of this entire issue is that a lot of people don't do that at all. They don't make that step. And number one, the second part that I want to make sure that we at least bring up, which we don't talk about enough, is that the kid is constantly coming to the parents. This is a kid crying out for help, and if we should be so lucky to have more offenders
And they did him a
confessing.
disservice.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. But
Stand by. Let's
he
because
did
they
do
talk
that.
about Josh in the legal system.
did do that.
Let's listen. This is new tonight.
Did Josh go in and speak with the authorities at that time?
Josh actually went to the court with us, and the judge talked to him sternly about what he had done, and I mean, burned in his mind never to go down that road again.
Was there a fear then? I mean,
Yes.
I'm asking not with judgment about whether he spoke.
Because this is 3 years later.
There's still a fear on his part that somebody might charge him.
Yes, at that time we didn't know if we'd be charged or not. We didn't know the statute of limitations had ran out, but he had already confessed everything.
So they're saying kind of what Charles said. They didn't know.
Yeah, they didn't know. And still after watching this interview, I'm unclear as to when he first came to them and said, look, Mom and Dad, I think I've done something bad here. Or from the way I understand it, they saw him walking out and one of the parents approached him and said, what just happened in there? And he confessed to this. What exactly was the response at that time? Because
There was no response, is my understanding, and that is what the
exactly.
problem is for me, at least.
And I think that what we need to encourage in this conversation,
Right.
if there's one good thing, which I hate saying if there's one good thing that comes out of this, it's the conversation to educate people. What do you do when a child comes to you and says, hey, Mom and Dad, I think I've just molested my
You
little
resist
sister.
the offender from the home immediately, and then it's therapy, and possible reporting
Okay,
to
stand
the
by.
police.
Okay.
Right.
Kate, last night they talked about why they did a high-profile reality show knowing that they had this secret in their family. Listen to this.
We had nothing to hide. We had taken care of all that years before. And when they asked us to do the reality TV show, all this had been taken care of 5 years before. And we had a clean bill of health from the state. We had said you'd gone through counseling, you had told the police.
Did any of the girls or did Josh say, whoa, hold on, Mom and Dad, hold on?
We had no fear because everything was taken care of, and that was a suit. That was actually a sealed juvenile record, and they had told us that all this stuff was done as a juvenile. This was all stuff that was sealed, and this is stuff that under law, there's no way that this could ever be brought out.
But they did have something to hide. It sounds like they believe that no one would ever find out, Kate, and that no one would ever know. Do you
And
agree?
it seems like it's more kind of an emphasis of once something has been completed, once something has been forgiven, we are free from that. A lot of times Christians do use the language of freedom and are not kind of burdened by things that have happened in the past. But we know from psychologically that things like abuse linger for a long time, and it takes a while for right restoration to happen. But I believe part of their Christian belief, maybe part of their faith, was we've moved on, we've reconciled from this, we've made a forgiveness effort, and now we get to kind of live our lives that way.
Okay.
And yeah.
I think, Nell, you had an important point about what a therapist is compelled to do when someone...
So the interesting thing here is that if they had right away removed him from the home and said, okay, he needs to see a therapist. A therapist is a mandated reporter across America. Now, the interesting thing about that is, for parents, it absolves you in a way. The system is there to protect the entire family, right? The victims, the perpetrator, and the parents. So if then all of a sudden you're discharging the child to a therapist, it's on the therapist to do what they need to do according to the law. And that might unburden a parent.
Of course, and that's why, as a former child sex crimes prosecutor, I said the advice is always remove the offender from the home and then therapy, because we know that therapists licensed therapists, state licensed therapists, certainly have that mandatory requirement. My next question is, what kind of therapist did they take Josh Duggar to that did not report this to the authority?
Well, I think the point is they didn't.
That's
right?
the last word. That's going to have to be the last. Thank you. We're going to continue this
you.
conversation because it is indeed an important one. There are a lot of people here who are survivors sitting at this table, and Kate as well, and people we had on last night as well. Thank you, all of you. I appreciate it.